And easy peasy hanging TV. Hello Internet, my name is Quinn, this is Blondihacks. This is another entry in my Machining Around the House series, wherein I make increasingly thin excuses to use my machine shop for DIY types of things. So today I'm going to make a wall mount for my television, and every time I do a more general interest topic like this, the search engines bring in a bunch of new drive-by viewers who don't necessarily understand that this is a machine shop channel, and thus I'm going to do things in a machine shoppy sort of way. Now, if you're one of those viewers, I'm going to call you my new friends, and as we go along here, I'll try to explain other ways that you could do this project with simpler tools if you don't have a machine shop that you're looking for excuses to use. So let's go. It always makes me happy to build a project with only materials that I already have, so I don't have to buy anything. That was my primary goal here. Digging through the stockpile, this square 1-inch tubing seems like something that could be TV standable. It's rather excessively heavy duty for the purpose, but I think I can make it work. Modern LCD televisions really aren't that heavy. In fact, the factory mounting hardware is just some buttons and a cable that they expect you to just hang on a hook of some sort, like a heavy-duty picture hook on the wall. I'm not comfortable doing that, so I am going to bolt it into the studs. So to that end, I'm going to cut 2 pieces of this 1-inch bar, a little bit longer than the 16-inch spacing on the studs in my house, and I'll cut these to length over on the horizontal bandsaw. You could, of course, make these cuts with a hacksaw or an angle grinder with a zip disc on it, or any number of other ways. You don't have to have such a fancy machine as this. If you're one of my new friends and you're not a hobby machinist or fabricator, then you probably don't have a machine like this, but that's okay, you don't need it. I clean up the insides of those cuts with a deburring tool, and I'll clean up the outsides with a file. I'm going to leave these ends exposed, so I want them to look decent and feel good to the touch at least. Next, over to one of my scrap bins, and I'm looking for some round bar stock with which to make pins. I'm going to join these 2 pieces of square bar with pins. That's what's going to hold the TV on the wall. This will all make sense here in a moment. I'll explain what I'm doing. But I found this scrap of 1/4-inch round bar here, and this will work just fine. Here's my idea. The lower bar will get wood screwed into the studs on the wall, like so, horizontally there. Then the other bar gets attached into the back of the TV using the VESA mount that's there for the purpose. And then the upper bar will sit on top of the lower bar, like so. And then there's going to be a pin that goes down through both bars. And the pin is attached to the upper bar and just kind of slides down. So it's kind of like a machinist French cleat, if you like. Again, this should be way overkill strength-wise for a modern LCD, which really doesn't weigh very much. Fun side note, my first flat panel television back in 1998 was a 50-inch plasma for trade show display purposes that I got a deal on, and it weighed about 100 pounds, and its mounting bracket used 6 6-inch lag screws and was made of 1/4-inch plate. Luckily, modern TVs don't need all that. I marked out the 16-inch spacing for the wood screws that are going to mount this to the wall, and I'll punch those and get ready to drill them out. Those wood screws that I'm using, by the way, are number 12 wood screws, which again is more than enough for this application. You could hang 10 of these TVs on those screws. Using the float lock vise there to align my spotting drill on the punch mark, I can now lock that down, and I'll spot these holes before drilling just to make sure that the final drill goes exactly where I want it to. A little bit of cutting oil. Wow, there's a lot of run out in that drill press chuck. I am not very happy about that. I think this thing may have been damaged in transit, like one of the movers grabbed the head of it by the chuck or something, because since the move, that thing's gotten pretty wobbly. I'm going to have to look into that at some point. But in the meantime, there's my spot. I'll put in my next drill size here, which is a clearance hole for the number 12 wood screw. I go all the way through with this. Then I go all the way up to a 1/2-inch drill and drill out the top half of the tube only with this larger size, and this will allow me to get the head of the screw through and also give me access for the screwdriver. Then I do the same thing on the other end. Back to the bench for deburring, of course. If you're one of my new friends, this is a Noga deburring kit here that comes with all these different tools for taking the sharp edges off of metal. I strongly recommend it. It's linked down below. Hashtag not sponsored. I can't reach in there with any of my tools, so to deburr the back sides of the smaller holes, I just feed the 1/2-inch drill in there that I used and give that a little twist by hand. That works pretty good. I've shown you how you can do these parts on a drill press, or even with a hand drill would work just fine as well if you're careful. But for the rest of this, I am going to use my milling machine because I really don't like what the chuck on that drill press is doing. It's really not behaving. I didn't feel like moving my vise, so I just stuck it in the vise, and I'll support the ends here with a machinist jack and a toe clamp on top there. This will keep the end nice and rigid while still allowing me access to where I need to drill here. And well, since we're in the milling machine anyway, we didn't get all dressed up for nothing. Might as well bust out the edge finder, make everything nice and accurate. So I found the center line, and I found one end, and I'm going to find the other end. So now I've got the absolute center of the entire bar. And I said at the top that this TV has a VESA mount on the back of it, like most TVs do, or probably all of them these days. Mine has the Part F number 3 mount, which is a 400mm square pattern. So I've got my DRO set to metric, and I'm going to plus and minus 200mm from that center point that I found. And once again spotting, and now I'm drilling all the way through with a clearance drill for a metric M8 bolt. The M8 is the standard bolt for the VESA bolt pattern. I'm actually using a letter S imperial drill here because I don't have the right drill and metric for this use case, but that's fine. Here's how this end works on the television. I can just sneak the M8 bolt in there. It's an Allen key panhead bolt, so I can stick the Allen key in through the top hole there and I'll be able to tighten it down. And because I can slip the bolt in through the end, I don't need a larger hole on the outside like I did with the wood screws. Then of course I do the same thing on the other end, this time at plus 200mm. Once in a blue moon, it's really nice to have a DRO that can do both units of measure. The next feature I need are the holes for the retaining pins. So for this I've got the bar turned 90 degrees, and once again I'm going to spot and drill through for these. The placement of these pins doesn't matter a whole lot, as you'll see. I just measured them from the ends with a scale. Precision definitely not important here. Once again, you could do all of this with a hand drill or a drill press just as easily. Especially if your drill doesn't have crazy run out in the chuck for some reason, which I'm sure the movers didn't do, but anyway, I'm fine. I drilled this all the way through here, and again, you'll see why in a moment. You might think I should have only drilled through half, but there is a method to my madness. Once again, deburring everything, and now I need to transfer those pinholes to the lower bar, so of course the pins can hold the two pieces together. This is why accuracy on where I positioned them wasn't important, because I'm going to be transfer punching these holes. Now the key design feature here is I've got an offset. That offset serves two purposes. First, it gives me space for double stick tape and felt on the lower mount, which I'll show you in a minute, and it gives clearance against the drywall so that you don't gouge it up while you're installing the TV. And there's a secret third feature here that you'll see at the very end of this video. But with that spacing set where I want it, a little bit of offset there, I can now clamp those together, and I'll transfer punch those holes. So the holes are centered in the upper bar, but they're going to be off-center towards the front, away from the wall on the lower bar. That's the design that I'm going for here. Then back over to the milling machine, or drill press, or hand drill, or plasma torch, or oxy torch, or iron worker, or whatever other method you have for making holes in steel. In this case, I'm going to use my wiggler there to get my spindle lined up on the punch mark there. I'm not going to bother edge finding because I don't really have a precise location in space for these holes like I did for the other ones. I just want them to land on my punch marks there that were transfer punched. So a wiggler and some magnification and a little bit of careful alignment here will get me close enough for this job. And once again, spot and drill. And I'm drilling through only the top bar here. Those both drilled out. You can see how the pin is going to go all the way through the top bar and then into the bottom bar. And I'm going to mark the length there of this pin, but this is not the length I want. This is the sort of point of no return length. I need the pins to be shorter than this because I don't want the pins to bottom out in the lower bar. I want the weight of the TV to be taken by the square bars sitting on top of each other. The pins are just there to keep the cat from knocking it off the wall. I'm going to put this in the lathe and clean up the ends, but again, you don't have to have a lathe to do this. You could just file them or cut them with a hacksaw. It would work just as well. I'm going to put a chamfer on one end here, and that's weld prep, as you'll see here in a moment. Then I'll pull it out and part it off to length. Of course, I've lost concentricity by moving it in the 3-jaw, but again, for these pins, concentricity could not be less important. I mean, I suppose it's a little important. You wouldn't want them to be bent or something, but not very important. This round bar is nothing special, if you're wondering. It's just basic 1018 mild steel. This is actually literally one of the round bars that they sell at big box stores in those material racks for 10 times the price of everywhere else. But if you don't have a steel yard handy, then it's a decent place to get small amounts like this for little DIY projects. The only thing about it is it doesn't like the parting blade very much. It's not really a machining steel per se, but lots and lots of cutting fluid, and it cuts okay. And Yahtzee! With both pins brought to that point, I now flip them around in the chuck, and I'm going to put a taper on this end. That's going to make it easier to slide the bars together, as you'll see on final installation. I'm going to do this with my compound. I swung the compound around to 10 degrees, which felt about right for this. Nothing fancy here, nothing requires measuring. And then I'll cut a decent looking taper on there. Again, just doing this by eye. The TV is not super heavy, but it is fairly heavy, and it's awkward. And my goal here is to be able to have a mount wherein one person can install the TV on the wall. So part of that is making sure that it's easy to locate these pins in their destination. You won't have an extra set of eyes or an extra set of hands to help with this, so I want to be able to just feel my way there. After the taper, I also rounded the end a little bit, which should help. Over to my little welding bench now to make those pins permanent. I used some scrap to hold the pin up at the right height. I've got it to where the chamfers are aligned there, which gives me kind of a V to set the weld down in. And then I'm basically just doing a plug weld there, welding in the entire end of the pin into the top surface there. The reason I'm installing them this way is that there won't be any kind of weld fillet on the underside of the pins that would interfere with the bars sitting flat on top of each other. Little cleanup there, make sure the weld is good. And then I'll flip it around and do the same thing on the other end. Now for a test fit, you can imagine the TV hanging on that, and the upper bar will slide down into the lower one like that. And I want this to be fairly easy to do so that it's not difficult to align the pins, but also it needs to be secure and not rattle when the subwoofer is going, stuff like that. If it's too tight at this point, you can easily enlarge the clearance holes a little bit in the lower bar. I'm really happy with that though, so I went ahead and ground my welds flush there on the top to make everything look nice. This is going to be entirely behind the TV anyway, but you know, I'll know. I think I just figured out why I keep going through so many lens covers. Now on to the lower mounts. They're not really mounts, they're actually just spacer blocks that go on the lower VESA bolt holes and keep the TV vertical by holding it off the wall the same amount that the upper mount does. So these are just little chunks of leftover square bar that I cut short, and I'm marking the centers of them to drill these through for some little M8 bolts to hold them onto the TV. Unfortunately, I only had 2 of these nice little panhead bolts that I'm using for the top, so I'm going to use regular bolts for the lower mounts, in keeping with my goal of not buying anything for this project. However, that does mean that I need room for a socket, so I went and found my thinnest wall socket, and I'm going to have to drill a hole in the upper layer of these little bars big enough to fit that socket. So once again, I spot, and instead of drilling through this time, I'm going to go straight to my 3/4 inch carbide hole saw. You could also use an annular cutter for this, but this hole saw will do a great job. It's got a nice pilot drill on it that's going to follow my spotting drill, and it's also going to simultaneously do the spotting drill for the lower hole, which is handy. I've got the drill press slowed way down here because this is a big cutter. This is 150 RPM here, about 1/3 of the speed I was cutting at before. Once that pilot goes through the lower layer, then the annular section engages there, and away we go. Just keep the feed rate nice and low, let the cutters do their work, and this does a really beautiful job. Carbide hole saws and annular cutters are really amazing things. You can create huge holes in heavy steel with very little effort. And you can run these on a hand drill as well in a pinch if you need to. I have definitely done that. I've done as large as a 2-inch hole saw through steel with a hand drill. It's not a lot of fun, but you can do it. If you're going to do this with a hand drill, the secret is to get a big drill that can handle running slowly for a long period, because you have to run a cutter like this slowly, and a lot of drills will overheat or stall out when running slowly. So get yourself a big quarter drill. Then I finish up with that M8 clearance drill once again to drill out the bottom layer there so that my bolts will fit through. You can see what a nice job that hole saw did. Modern carbide hole saws are really amazing things. It's worth it to get the good quality ones because boy, they do a nice job. If I did that right, the bolt should fall through the center there, and then I should be able to get my socket on there to tighten that up. That looks like that's going to work. Next, I'm going to get paint on things here, so I'm going to clean everything up, degrease it with acetone. This square bar comes from the steel yard with a lot of black crud on it, as you can see. It's a combination of storage oil that they put on it and just general mill scale dust, crud, whatever, miscellaneous. It's actually nice for storage because it keeps it from rusting, but it's not good for paint. So clean all of that off. And I'm going to tape off the pins here. I don't really want paint on them because I don't want to interfere with the fit there that we have on the lower bar. And they have, again, a hot rolled finish on them anyway, so they're not going to rust. If you're really worried about it, you can put a little bit of light oil on those pins to keep them from rusting. Out into the great outdoor paint booth now. It's a little bit too cold out here for painting, but the parts are warm from being in the shop, and then after the paint went on, I brought them right back into the shop to dry, and that seemed to work okay. The final touch here is some felt that's going to go on the lower blocks there so that they don't scratch up the paint on the drywall. Those get double stick taped into place. That was, of course, part of why I have the offset between the two bars there. And also, as I said, so that the upper bar doesn't scratch up the drywall when you're installing this TV. Also for the secret third reason that I'm going to tell you at the end. Then using a hobby knife, I open those holes back up again, of course, since I still need to get the bolts and the socket in there for installation. Felt is really great stuff to keep around the shop. I find all kinds of uses for it. There's all the pieces of the mounting system there. Let's get this thing installed and see if it actually works. I have the supreme luxury here of not having to actually find the studs because the previous owner had their TV mounted here as well, and I can see where they repaired the holes from when they removed their mount, which, it was nice of them to repair the holes. So I'm placing mine a little below theirs because I don't want to try and reuse those holes, and also I want mine lower anyway. But just in case, I also did start with a tiny drill to make sure that there is in fact wood back there. And there is, so success. That's the easiest stud finding I've ever had to do in my entire life. I really hate stud finding, and that's why I really hate installing things on drywall, but as such things go, this has gone very well. Then I go in with the pilot drill for the number 12 wood screw. There's charts online for looking up what pilot drill sizes you should use for each type of wood screw, or you can just hold the drill up to the screw like my dad taught me, and you're looking for a drill whose body is the same size as the intersection of the screw beneath the threads. I started with a screwdriver to give these screws a good start in life, and then I go in with the impact driver here. The size of that pilot hole is really important for wood screws. If it's too big, then the screw doesn't have a secure hold, and in fact you can spin it in the hole and then it's useless. And if it's too small, then the screw can jam up halfway down or 3/4 of the way down, and you twist the head off of it with the impact driver, which is a super annoying situation. I'm sure we've all been there on both of those counts. That seemed to go just fine though, so now it's time to install the other half on the television. So once again, I've got my little M8 bolts there that I feed in through the ends, and I can use the holes out front to tighten those into the TV. One of them is an Allen head and one of them is a Phillips head, because that's what I had. And then the little spacer blocks go on the bottom, once again using the regular bolts and the big hole with the socket there. I'm just hand tightening those because, again, those are just spacers. They're not holding any weight. Again, per the factory instructions on this, you do not need to use all 4 holes to hold the weight of the TV. As you can see by this bony blonde lady carrying it by herself, these TVs really aren't that heavy. But moment of truth, can one person hang a TV with this style of mount? Survey says... Whoa, look at that. I got it in one. I actually kind of didn't believe that I had. I was sort of holding it and looking around because surely that couldn't have just worked, right? But sure enough, it seems to be in there. Here's another angle where you can see how the two pieces slide together there with that little bit of space for the top block. And easy peasy hanging TV. Well, that worked honestly even better than I'd hoped. The biggest weakness of this design is probably that it does sit very, very close to the wall because it's just 1-inch tubing, which looks nice, but it does make the cabling quite difficult to plug in into the back. So either, I would say, plug in the cables first before you hang it up, or a nice side effect of this design actually is because those retaining pins only go through the top of the lower bar, and that clearance behind the upper bar combined allows the TV to tilt away from the wall at the bottom by a couple of inches. And that was just enough to allow me to plug in the cables, but a little more would have been nice, so I would probably offset the upper bar a little bit more to give you more clearance there. Every millimeter helps when you're trying to fish the cables in with your hand. But overall, super happy with this. It's going to do exactly what I needed it to do, and this was a super easy afternoon project. Couple of hours, you can knock this out. Materials are not expensive, so I definitely recommend this approach. Thank you very much to my patrons who make all of this content possible, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.